From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Tim Scott ends his presidential campaign on the weekend after he found little traction for his message of conservative optimism. Who will inherit his voters in Iowa and other primary states? And are the realistic alternatives to Donald Trump down to Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis? Plus, Democratic angst about Joe Biden continues to build as Joe Manchin of West Virginia decides not to run for the Senate and teases a possible third-party run for the White House. Is there any chance that the president decides to step aside and let a younger Democrat move to the fore? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal, here on Potomac Watch with Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder Odell. Welcome to you both. Let's start with Tim Scott. The South Carolina senator entered the race in May with a $20 million bank account. I think a lot of people had some high hopes for him. An appealing political figure. As they say in the Senate, it's impossible to dislike Tim Scott. But like him or not on the stump, the voters never really seemed to warm to him. Let's listen to his announcement on Fox News on Sunday.
But when I go back to Iowa, it will not be as a presidential candidate. I am suspending my campaign. I think the voters who are the most remarkable people on the planet have been really clear that they're telling me not now, Tim. I don't think they're saying, Trey, no, but I do think they're saying not now. And so I'm going to respect the voters, and I'm going to hold on and keep working really hard and look forward to another opportunity.
Kate, never easy to put yourself out there in front of the voters and have them say, sorry, no. But he has acknowledged that his message just didn't resonate, his candidacy didn't. And so my own view is that he did the right thing at bowing out at this stage.
Right. It's not easy to reckon with that political reality, but also in these campaigns, you're often surrounded by folks who are telling you, just keep trying, hold out until here. If 5 other people lose, you can inherit the earth. And those messages can be hard to overcome. And so I think here he deserves credit for getting out while he could still make a difference and influence the GOP primary, either by perhaps throwing his support behind either Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. His contribution to the campaign was that constructive, optimistic message that was really valuable in a party that is really flirting with national despair and grievance, and is really questioning whether it does want to continue a Ronald Reagan-style optimistic legacy. I think that compelling biography of his story of upward mobility, having a grandfather who had no formal education behind elementary school, and for him to go on to be in Congress, I think it was a good story that did resonate with voters at some level, but I don't think he was able to turn it into a real agenda for the country. I think he had a glimmer of hope for national renewal that was well placed. But for instance, he put out an economic plan that was just a grab bag of potential ideas that wasn't really anchored in anything. And so I think the story was potent, but he really did not translate it into what he would do in office and an agenda you can rally voters behind.
Yeah, the one problem I think he had was the debates where he didn't manage to stand out in that crowd, struggled to define himself there, struggled in the first debate in particular to kind of get himself in there to make some comments among the big field. And then the second debate almost overdid it, trying to go after Nikki Haley on the curtains she bought at the UN when she was ambassador to the UN. The other problem, Kim, the public mood, which is, as Kate said, frustrated, surly, didn't really want to hear that there's a better world just around the corner. They're focusing on the bad one we have now. So much of presidential politics is timing. I remember Phil Gramm, who ran against Bob Dole and didn't get the nomination, which was a pretty good time. Economy was good. And I remember him once telling me that he had concluded that he couldn't get elected unless there was really a national crisis, economic crisis or turmoil. You know, sometimes the moment isn't just right for what you're selling or for your personality and persona.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't necessarily think that voters were rejecting his optimism or rejecting this very aspirational story he told, much as Kate said. I think that instead they felt that he wasn't addressing the problems that are foremost in their mind. I mean, one of them obviously is the left's dour view of the United States and the economic climate, which does make people feel that they can't get ahead. But he didn't talk a lot about some of the other cultural issues that are on people's minds. He didn't drill in, as Kate said, to a lot of those economic questions that are bothering them. So you can have all this sunniness, but then the question is, in aid of what? And how are you going to get there? I think one other thing that's changed too, Paul, Tim Scott went into this very much thinking he was going to grab the evangelical vote in Iowa. He had a very spiritual campaign, leaned very heavily on his faith. That has certainly worked for candidates in the past. I remember Mike Huckabee back in 2008 very much leaned in on his religious background and used that to win Iowa and a number of other southern states. And that was certainly Tim Scott's aspiration, was to get through Iowa, do well, and then end up back in his home state of South Carolina just a few states later. That didn't work out. And I think that's in part because, again, while voters do care about, I think, the religious and spiritual aspects of candidates, it's not top of mind. It's not as pressing as it's been in the past, or I should say voters are also looking for a lot of other things. And they just felt in the end that Tim Scott wasn't giving them what they needed to hear.
Do you think, Kate, he has a presidential future, or is this pretty much it?
Well, I think for starters, he'll certainly be in the mix for any Republican who wins the nomination to consider as a vice president. He said in his announcement that he wasn't much interested in that, but when the call comes...
They all say that.
When the call comes, you think differently. And I do think, to your point about national mood having such an influence on politics, I think he could refine this pitch, could develop a more substantive agenda. Also, Nikki Haley, I think one reason that she is, starting to do better in the polls and has risen is because we have two regional wars going on in the world. And she, even before the attacks in Israel, was staking her campaign on her experience abroad and on a strong America in a dangerous world. And so I think that is an example of where world events matter. And so she has been, I think, the beneficiary on the Republican side as someone who's capable of managing those crises.
Tim Scott said he is not, at least at this stage, going to endorse anybody else in the race. He said his best role would be to sit on the sidelines. Of course, if he does want to be vice president, or at least without the prospect for that, he won't be able to endorse anybody other than Donald Trump. And so it's notable that he has not endorsed Donald Trump, because if he were courting the VP job, that would be the easy play. And I suppose he could still do that. My question to him would be, do you really want to be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, knowing what has happened to Mike Pence and how people who work for Trump tend to get chewed up? On the other hand, Trump, if he gets the nomination and wins the White House, he'll only be able to serve one term. So the fight for the 2028, he would have some advantages, I guess, if he became VP and Trump had a successful term. So it is, I guess, a decision that'd be hard for anyone to turn down. What do you think, Kim?
I think all these guys are still waiting to see if there can't be a race of it with someone else against Donald Trump. There's plenty of other reasons why Mike Pence hasn't endorsed, certainly not Donald Trump. That would be an odd thing to happen. But I think that we've been having this discussion for months now about what would this look like if the field got smaller. Some of these people that were only polling in small single digits got out, and you had a one-on-one against DeSantis and Haley, and then one of them took on Trump. Because as we've continued to note, Donald Trump's share of, for instance, like the Iowa electorate is in the 40s, but it's a soft 40, and there's still voters looking at alternatives. So I think Tim Scott, along with Mike Pence, I think if some of these other guys get out, they're all going to hold their fire. And then they're going to wait to see if they can make an endorsement when it matters, when it looks like maybe there's a one-on-one race, or there could be some sort of influence that they could wield, for instance, in a competition to whittle down to that one, say, between DeSantis and Haley.
And the question is the field now down to Haley and DeSantis as plausible alternatives to Trump? I tend to think that that's where we are. Vivek Ramaswamy has, I think, taken himself out of serious consideration with a variety of his positions and comments in the last debate, and he's falling in the polls. Chris Christie is still staying in and is putting everything he has into New Hampshire. He's not running in Iowa to any extent at all, figuring that somebody else will win there because of its evangelical base for the Republican electorate. but he would do better in New Hampshire and then could make his breakout there. He also thinks he can outlast DeSantis and Haley and emerge as the one-on-one to Trump, where he thinks he can take him down. But he's just not registering enough in the polls outside of New Hampshire, Kate. And I find it hard for Christie, as formidable as he is in debate and willing to take on Trump, hard to see him having a path.
Right, especially as the criteria for the December 6th debate get so much more stringent and require a 6% in a national poll or 2 polls or 1 in a battle state and 1 national. I mean, these are tougher requirements that put Christie's candidacy perhaps not in the mix on the stage. And so I think anybody who is not in the December debate should think seriously about getting out, because the Republicans don't want a repeat of 2016, where too many candidates hung around for too long and precluded that direct challenge to Donald Trump. One thing I'm watching, as it looks like DeSantis and Haley become the more viable alternatives, is whether they notice that they are really running against Trump more than each other. I think back to that third debate that we watched, where they got into this terrible infighting match over who had pursued Chinese companies to come to their state and when. And they both emerged from it looking weak and petulant, I thought. So my question is when they will start really focusing on who they're running against, even if that doesn't get the same fireworks on the debate stage.